The first wolf Elara Fen found was already disappearing beneath the snow. Only one pale eye remained visible above the drift, open and furious, while an iron trap held the animal by the foreleg. Blood had frozen black against the steel. The wolf did not whimper when Elara approached. It watched her through the storm, as if deciding whether the woman staggering toward it was another hunter or merely another fool. Elara stopped 10 paces away, fighting for breath. The sensible thing was to turn around. Briar Glen lay more than 2 miles behind her, hidden by the blizzard. Elara had left before sunset to search for Widow Marine's escaped cart horse, lost its tracks near the northern ridge, and followed a trail of blood instead. Now she understood the blood had not belonged to the horse. She lowered the lantern and saw the trap more clearly. The jaws were not the crude iron used by shepherds. They were forged from metal dark enough to drink the lantern light, threaded with narrow silver lines that glimmered like frost beneath a full moon. The wolf bared its teeth. "I know," Elara whispered. "I wouldn't trust me either." She knelt and slid the handle of her hatchet beneath the locking bar. The wolf snapped once, close enough that she felt its breath through her glove. "If you bite me, we both die here." The wolf growled. Elara pushed. Nothing moved. She braced one boot against the trap, used both hands, and forced harder. Pain shot through her shoulder. The bar shifted a fraction. Again! She did not know whether she was speaking to herself or the animal. The wind screamed through the pines. Snow filled the wolf's fur. Elara pushed until something in the mechanism cracked. The jaws opened, and the wolf ripped its leg free. She fell backward. For one terrible heartbeat, the animal stood over her. Its amber eyes were inches from her face. Then it turned away. The wolf limped toward the ravine below. Elara sat in the snow, half laughing from relief. "You're welcome." The animal looked back once. That was when she saw the cages. At first, they looked like black ribs protruding from the storm. Then the lantern light moved across one iron door, then another, then another. Elara stood. One cage had overturned beside a shattered wagon. Another was chained to a pine. 3 more were half buried farther down the slope. Inside them, shapes moved. Wolves. She counted because counting kept fear from becoming panic. 6, 9, 12, 17, 19. Some were gray, some nearly black. 2 had russet fur. One was small enough to be young, though still larger than any dog Elara had known. Several were injured. One lay so still she thought it dead until its ear twitched when her lantern passed. The largest cage stood apart from the others. 3 chains anchored it to iron stakes driven into the frozen earth. Inside lay a white wolf unlike any animal Elara had ever seen. He was enormous. Even curled against the floor, he occupied almost half the cage. His fur was white enough to vanish into the storm, except where blood stained one shoulder. A black collar encircled his neck. 3 chains ran from that collar to the floor. His eyes were silver, not gray, silver. Elara forgot the cold for one breath. Every child in Briar Glen knew stories about the wolves beyond the Frostmarch. Old songs said they understood human speech. Grandmothers claimed they remembered cruelty across generations. Drunk shepherds swore that under a full moon, the northern wolves could stand upright, wear human faces, and walk through a village without anyone knowing what they were. Most people laughed at those tales in daylight. Nobody laughed when wolves howled from the mountains after dark. Elara had never decided what she believed. At that moment, she believed only what she could see. Someone had captured 20 living creatures and abandoned them in a blizzard. She looked back toward the road. If she left now, she might still reach Briar Glen. Her cottage had 1 room, a leaking roof, little winter grain, and 14 silver crowns of inherited debt. None of these wolves were her responsibility. None of these wolves were her responsibility. The white wolf lifted his head. He did not plead. He did not whine. He looked at the storm as though the storm itself had insulted him by assuming he might surrender. Elara knew that expression. She had worn it at her father's grave when steward. Pell arrived before the earth was packed down and informed her the debt would remain attached to the cottage. She had worn it again when her mother died, and neighbors stopped bringing food after the 3rd week because grief became inconvenient when it lasted too long. Elara turned away from the road. "All right," she whispered. The amber-eyed wolf she had freed stopped beside her. "But if I freeze to death doing this, I expect at least one of you to look guilty." She approached the first cage. The lock resisted 2 blows from her hatchet before breaking. A gray wolf crawled out and collapsed. Elara dragged it clear, wrapped a strip from her underskirt around its bleeding paw, and moved to the next cage. The work became a brutal rhythm. Elara broke locks, pried doors open, wrapped wounds, and moved on before her hands could stop obeying her. Her father's old lesson helped with the more complicated mechanisms. Every machine was only a collection of decisions made by someone who assumed nobody else would understand them. "Locks are arrogant hinges," she muttered, when a hairpin finally turned one stubborn mechanism. The freed wolves did not flee. They formed a silent ring and watched her continue. "I am not adopting 20 wolves," Elara warned them. The amber-eyed one sat down as if unconvinced. She reached the white wolf last. By then, darkness had swallowed the ravine. Her lantern flame had shrunk. Blood ran from 2 split knuckles. She could no longer feel the toes of her left foot. The white wolf watched every movement. His cage lock opened with the hairpin, but the door meant nothing while the collar held him chained inside. Elara crouched beyond the bars. "You're the worst of them." His ears flattened. "No offense." The collar had been riveted shut. She crawled inside. The wolf's body tensed. "I have to touch you." His silver eyes remained on her face. "If you decide to eat me afterward, wait until I get this thing off. Otherwise, the whole evening becomes extremely pointless." She reached for the collar. A sharp heat bit through her glove. Elara jerked back. The silver threading inside the metal glowed faintly. "Whatever this is, I hate it." The white wolf's breathing was shallow. The wound in his shoulder had blackened around the edges. Elara searched her pack. Rope, a needle, dried yarrow, half a loaf, a tiny jar of salve, a metal wedge her father had used to split kindling. No hammer. She used the back of the hatchet. The first strike rang against the collar. The wolf snapped. His teeth stopped less than an inch from her wrist. Outside the cage, 19 wolves surged forward. Not toward Elara, toward him. A warning. The white wolf froze. Elara's face had gone pale, but she did not pull away. "I know it hurts." His jaws closed slowly. She placed her hand beside his muzzle again. "So trust me for 5 minutes." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the white wolf lowered his head. Elara struck the wedge again, and again. The rivet cracked on the 7th blow. The collar fell open. The wolf dragged in a breath so deep his whole body shook. Elara unlocked the chains. "Come on." He tried to stand. His injured foreleg collapsed. Elara caught him around the neck, though she could not possibly support his weight. The amber-eyed wolf entered the cage and pressed against his other side. Together, they helped the white wolf stand. Elara had no way to know that the amber-eyed wolf was Captain Ilian Vale of the Moon Guard. She could not know the 19 animals surrounding her understood every word she had spoken. And she could not know that the white wolf leaning against her shoulder was Kael Varrow. sovereign of the Frostmarch, lord of Moonhold, protector of the northern packs, and king of every Wolfborn territory, from the Black Pine River to the mountains beyond the human maps. 3 nights earlier, King Kael had crossed secretly into the human borderlands with 19 of his most trusted guards, because wolves and humans had both begun vanishing near Baron Vane's estates. Each side blamed the other. Kael had refused to begin a war based on rumor. Someone had been waiting for him. The hunters used moonbane iron, forbidden under the Accord of Ash and Moon, that had kept humans and Wolfborn from open war for 87 years. Moonbane wounds burned through Wolfborn blood and trapped them in whichever form they wore when the poison entered their bodies. Kael and his guard had traveled as wolves. By the time he understood the ambush, half his men were already down. He could have escaped. Instead, he turned back for them. That decision put the collar around his throat. The hunters had not killed the moon guard. They had chained them in the ravine and left them for the storm. That was the part Kael had not understood. Until Elara appeared. Now he watched the human woman shiver beneath a coat too thin for the weather, bleeding from both hands, because she had decided strangers in cages were worth risking her life for. She had no idea what she had just changed. "We cannot stay here," Elara said. The storm answered by throwing another sheet of snow through the ravine. She looked at the freed wolves, then toward the dark slope west of the cages. "There's an abandoned charcoal burner's hut near the old creek. My father used it once when he was cutting timber. If the roof is still standing, we can make a fire." Captain Ilian stared at her. Elara pointed into the storm. "Do not look at me like that. I realize I'm explaining directions to wolves." Kael almost laughed. The moonbane made even that impossible. Elara took one step toward the west. 20 wolves followed. She stopped. They stopped. "Oh, now you want me to lead." Ilian moved to her side. "Fine." The journey should have taken less than an hour. In the storm, it became a battle against distance itself. Elara moved by memory, following the shape of the land beneath the snow. The wolves could have outpaced her even wounded, but they did not. They slowed when she slowed. When one collapsed, 2 others remained until Elara helped it rise. Kael remembered the route only in fragments. Moonbane burned through his veins. The white world blurred into black trees and the warm pulse of Elara's hand whenever she touched his injured shoulder. At the frozen creek, the snow concealed thin ice. Elara stepped onto it first. The surface broke. She vanished into black water. Kael moved before thought. Pain tore through his shoulder as he threw himself flat and caught the back of Elara's coat between his teeth. The current dragged her beneath the edge. Ilian seized Kael's fur. 2 others braced behind him. Together, they pulled. Elara came out coughing, soaked from chest to boots. For several seconds, she lay on the ice, staring at the sky. Then she said, "This has become a very bad evening." The wolves closed around her. Elara blinked as 20 bodies formed a wall against the wind. Heat gathered beneath fur and breath. She looked at Kael first. "Thank you." He touched his nose to her shoulder. The charcoal hut still stood, barely. Half the roof had collapsed, the chimney leaned, and one wall was patched with bark and old clay. To Elara, it looked like a palace. She forced the door open. Inside were a rusted stove, a broken table, 2 shelves, and a pile of dry timber protected by the intact part of the roof. Her hands shook so badly, she dropped the flint 3 times. On the 4th attempt, a spark caught. The wolves filled almost every corner of the room. Elara stripped off the wet outer layers of her clothing and wrapped herself in an old burlap sack she found near the stove while the fire grew. She seemed too tired to be embarrassed by the audience. Then she started laughing. Not because anything was funny, because the other choice was crying. I went out to find a horse. Kael lay near the fire. Ilyan guarded the door. Elara looked around the hut at 20 enormous predators. I have failed dramatically. That night, she treated every injured wolf before treating herself. She boiled snow in a dented pot, cleaned cuts, wrapped paws with strips torn from her underskirt, removed splinters of black iron, divided the half loaf into portions so small they were insulting, and apologized as if the wolves had paid for dinner. When she reached Kael, she examined the wound in his shoulder. The bolt had broken beneath the skin. This has to come out. Kael showed his teeth. Yes, I remember your opinion about medical care. She heated her knife in the fire. This will hurt. It did. Kael did not move. Elara opened the wound with hands that were gentle despite their exhaustion. She found the buried fragment and pulled. Blackened silver slid free. Kael's growl shook dust from the rafters. Every Wolfborn in the hut reacted to the scent. Elara noticed. She held the fragment in the firelight. What are you? No one answered. She wrapped it in cloth and put it in her pack. Kael's eyes followed. Good. Evidence. The thought was cold and immediate. Whoever had armed the hunters with moonbane had access to knowledge and materials protected by both kingdoms. A peasant woman had just preserved the first physical proof of a conspiracy that might have been designed to start a war. Elara thought she had pulled a poisoned arrowhead from a wolf. Before dawn, she fell asleep sitting against the wall. Her blanket covered a young gray guard with cracked ribs. Her cloak remained under Kael's injured shoulder. She slept without either. As the moonbane weakened, the pack bond began returning in broken pulses. Ilyan's voice reached Kael's mind. My king. Report. 18 guards stable. Nessa's ribs are damaged. Corin lost much blood. None can shift yet. And the woman? Ilyan looked toward Elara. Foolish. Kael almost agreed. Brave, Ilyan added. Yes. What do we do with her when we recover? Kael studied the sleeping woman. Dirt streaked her cheek. One hand remained curled around the handle of her knife, even in sleep. Protect her. Ilyan's ears lifted. Until when? Kael looked at the cloth bundle holding the moonbane fragment. Until I decide otherwise. Morning arrived gray and bitter. Elara woke to find 20 wolves watching her with unsettling expectation. No, she said immediately. You cannot all come home with me. 20 wolves followed her out of the hut anyway. The valley lay buried beneath fresh snow. Elara needed to reach Briar Glen before Widow Marine assumed she was dead, and before Baron Vane's steward came for the winter rent. At the last ridge, she crouched before the white wolf. You have to disappear now. People here lose sheep every winter. Half the men own crossbows, and fear makes the other half foolish. You survived those cages. Do not die because you followed me home. The white wolf held her gaze for a long moment, then touched his nose to her palm. One by one, the pack vanished into the pines. Briar Glen had survived the storm with broken roofs and buried fences. Widow Marine embraced Elara and announced that the missing horse had returned by itself before midnight. Elara told no one about the wolves. By afternoon, 12 men in Baron Vane's colors rode into the square with crossbows across their saddles. Steward Pell led them, but Elara's attention fixed on the stranger beside him, a broad-shouldered man with a scar across his mouth, black gloves, and a silver wolf head clasp at his throat. The same emblem had been carved into one of the cages. Pell unrolled a proclamation. By order of Baron Garrick Vane, all residents are to report unusual animal activity following the storm. A licensed hunting party lost valuable animals and equipment north of the ridge. 20 wolves escaped containment. Elara's stomach dropped. Where were you last night? Widow Marine answered first. Looking for my horse. His gaze dropped to the dried blood on her sleeve. He smiled without warmth. Name? Elara Fen. Search the northern cottages, he ordered. Steward Pell hesitated. On what authority, Master Rusk? Rusk displayed a ring. Pell went pale and stepped aside. Beyond the orchard, hidden under the pines, Kael heard the name through the pack bond. Rusk. He knew the mercenary. 6 months earlier, Kael had seen him leaving a private chamber in Moonhold, used by Counselor Malrek, a Wolfborn noble who had spent the past year demanding war with the humans. The hunters had known Kael's secret route, possessed forbidden moonbane, and arranged the trapping site on human soil. Someone in his own court had helped them. Rusk followed Elara into her cottage and searched with deliberate cruelty. He opened cupboards, smashed jars, and cut through the mattress her mother had once slept on. Elara's anger nearly betrayed her when he moved toward the hearth. Beneath the third stone lay the moonbane fragment she had removed from Kael's shoulder, and beside it, the broken black collar she had carried home from the ravine. He seized her wrist. You did find them. 20 wolves. Where are they? When she refused to answer, he struck her hard enough to throw her against the table. Outside, Kael surged forward with 6 of his guards. He stopped them with a single command through the pack bond. If Wolfborn killed human soldiers in the middle of Briar Glen, the treaty would break exactly as someone intended. Restraint tasted like blood. Inside, Rusk approached Elara again. Do you know what wolves do to women alone in the woods? She wiped blood from her mouth. Less than men, apparently. Before he could strike her again, a horn sounded near the orchard. Elian, obeying Kael's order, showed himself between the trees just long enough for the soldiers to see a black wolf. Half the men ran after him. Elara kicked the back of Rusk's knee and fled through the rear door. You came back, she breathed. Relief overcame sense. She dropped to her knees and buried both hands in the white wolf's fur. He pressed his head against her shoulder, then looked toward the shouting soldiers. Elara slowly pulled back. Something in the intelligence of that stare finally became impossible to dismiss. Rusk shouted from inside the cottage. He had found the hearthstone. We need to go. Kael ran for the forest. Elara followed, and the rest of the pack emerged around her. She led them through abandoned charcoal pits and a narrow granite cut where horses could not follow. Crossbow bolts struck the trees behind them. One grazed her arm. Kael wheeled back, but Elara shouted before he could attack. If you fight them here, they bring more. For the next 6 days, Elara hid with the wolves while Rusk's men searched the roads. She could not return home. He had the collar and the moonbane fragment now, enough to know she had seen more than she should. The wolves hunted, carried dry wood, and behaved less like animals with each passing day. Elara stopped pretending not to notice. At night, she spoke most often to the white wolf she had begun calling Ghost. Believing silence made him safe, she told him about the 14 silver crowns attached to her father's failed harvest, about her mother's death, and about paying a debt that somehow never became smaller. I don't need a manor, she whispered one night, leaning against his warm side. I just want one roof nobody can take from me. Kael listened with growing shame. He had spent years negotiating borders and calling the absence of armies peace. Elara was teaching him what peace looked like beneath a crown. Enough grain for winter, a debt that could actually be repaid, a door that belonged to the person closing it. On the 7th night, the moonbane finally released him. Kael fled the hut as the transformation began. White fur withdrew into skin, bones reshaped beneath silver light, and within moments the wolf became a man in a dark torn tunic, the wound still visible at his shoulder. Ilian shifted beside him. He returned alone. Elara woke when the door opened. Ghost! Then she saw the stranger standing where the white wolf should have been. My name is Kael, he said, raising both hands. She stared at the wound in his shoulder, then at his silver eyes, then at the empty place beside the stove. You're him. Her face went red with shock, then anger. You understood me? Yes. Everything? Kael wished there were a safer answer. Yes. She looked as if she might throw the hatchet again. You let me talk to you? You let me sleep against you? You let me call you Ghost. Who are you? Kael Varrow. The name meant nothing to her until he added, King of the Frostmarch. Elara laughed once, without humor. Of course you are. She stormed outside and stopped when the other 19 wolves began to shift. Men and women stood where the pack had been. Ilian gave her an apologetic bow. Nessa admitted she had been the one who somehow produced coins for supplies. Elara looked from them to Kael. So I rescued 19 royal guards and 1 king. Kael exhaled. Yes, I almost died in a river for a king. Her anger returned when the absurdity faded. You should have told me the moment you could. Yes, Kael continued. I cannot defend waiting. At first, I needed to know who attacked us. Then I needed to know whether you were in danger. After that, I became selfish. You enjoyed watching a peasant make a fool of herself? No, I enjoyed being someone you did not fear. My whole life, people have spoken to the crown before they speak to me, he said. You found me bleeding in a cage, threatened me with medical treatment, and gave me your cloak. For a few days, I was simply someone beside your fire. Ilara's voice softened, but the anger did not disappear. You had honesty because you took mine without giving yours. Kael bowed his head. You are right. I cannot undo it. I can only stop hiding things now. So he told her everything he knew. The disappearances along the border, the secret investigation, the ambush, the moonbane, and why Counselor Malrek's connection to Rusk mattered. When he finished, Elara pulled a cord from beneath her dress. A broken rivet from Kael's collar hung from it. He turned it over. On the underside was the mark of Moonhold's royal forge, a crescent pierced by 3 nails. Elara went pale. Your own people made the collar. Someone with access to the sealed armory had armed the hunters. Kael asked Elara to come to Moonhold. She refused at first, pointing out that a palace belonging to the people who forged his chains did not sound safe. He promised she would be a witness and a guest, not a prisoner. She made him say plainly that he would not command her. What happens to Briar Glen if there is a war? She finally asked. Kael answered without softening it. It becomes the battlefield. That decided her. They would face the future together. Moonhold was no bone-filled cave from human stories. It was a city carved into a mountain gorge, crossed by stone bridges and waterfalls, with Wolfborn shifting between human and animal forms in the streets. At the gate, guards dropped to one knee when they saw Kael. For the first time, Elara saw the distance hidden inside his title. Your Majesty, she said carefully. Kael winced. I was Ghost yesterday. Before she could answer, a black-haired woman with silver eyes strode down the steps, punched Kael in the chest, and then pulled him into an embrace. 7 days, she snapped. I considered declaring you dead just so I could kill you when you returned. Kael endured the assault with surprising dignity. Elara Fen, my aunt, Lady Elara Varrow, commander of Moonhold. Within an hour, Elara stood in a circular chamber surrounded by Wolfborn nobles. The broken rivet lay at the center of the table. Councillor Malrek examined it with elegant calm. A royal forge mark proves little, he said. Hundreds of such pieces exist. Moonbane does not, Kael replied. Then perhaps humans stole it. From the sealed armory? Malrek spread his hands. That would suggest incompetence among those responsible for its protection. Elara watched Malrek carefully. Kael had asked her to speak only if questioned. She ignored him. Why weren't they killed? If the hunters wanted the king dead, why leave 20 Wolfborn trapped in the ravine and trust a storm to finish the work? They wanted the bodies found. Isra understood first. The inspection patrol, a human border patrol, had been scheduled to cross the ravine 2 days after the blizzard. They would have found a dead wolf king and 19 royal guards among human cages and traps, surrounded by human tracks and weapons. Then Baron Vane's guilt is obvious, Malrek said. Too obvious. Rusk came to Briar Glen already calling them the Baron's wolves. The story existed before the bodies could be found. Someone wanted humans and Wolfborn to reach the same conclusion before anyone asked questions. Kael ordered the sealed armory and every recovered trap examined. Malrek could not oppose an investigation without exposing himself, but Elara saw his hand tighten once at his side. He was afraid. The search found missing moonbane and records of iron shipments crossing the border as agricultural equipment. One recovered cage hinge also carried a second maker's stamp beneath the moonhold mark. 2 letters scratched into the metal. Eamon Reed, the old blacksmith of Briar Glen, had repaired her father's plow for 20 years. I think we need to ask him. Eamon Reed was not a traitor. He was terrified. Elara and Kael entered Briar Glen 2 nights later beneath travelers' cloaks. The village looked smaller to Elara after Moonhold. Her cottage had been sealed with Baron Vane's crest. The sight hurt more than she expected. Kael noticed. He said nothing. Eamon's forge still burned. The old smith opened the door holding a hammer. When he recognized Elara, his face collapsed. You should not have come back. Why? Because they're watching. Kael closed the door. Who? Eamon looked at him. Who are you? A friend. Elara almost laughed. Eamon noticed the silver eyes. His expression changed. Oh. Kael lowered his hood. Eamon went white. My king. Do not kneel. That surprised both Elara and Eamon. Kael placed the trap hinge on the table. Did you forge this? Eamon's hands began to shake. I forged the frame. For whom? Silence. Elara stepped closer. Eamon. The old man's eyes filled with tears. They took my granddaughter. Elara stopped breathing. Mila? He nodded. Rusk came last spring. Said the Baron needed hunting traps. I refused when I saw the drawings. Too large for deer. Too strong. His voice broke. 2 days later, Mila disappeared. Kyle's face hardened. They sent me one of her ribbons. I made what they asked. Where is she? Elara whispered. I don't know. How many traps? Kael asked. 40? Kael and Elara exchanged a look. Only 20 had been in the ravine. What happened to the others? Eamon opened a hidden compartment beneath the forge. Inside lay copied orders, shipment records, names, dates, and seals. I kept everything I could. Kael read the first page. Malrek's seal appeared beside Baron Vane's. Proof. Actual proof. But one entry mattered more. 20 additional moonbane cages had been delivered to an abandoned silver mine near Blackglass Pass. Elara's blood ran cold. Who are those for? Eamon shook his head. Rusk said the first death would begin the war. Kael continued reading. The second would make peace impossible. A date appeared at the bottom. 3 days. Away. The night of long moon. Elara understood before he spoke. There's another attack. Yes. On whom? Kael's gaze moved across the ledger. Everyone. The plan was monstrous because it was simple. Baron Vane would send human villagers to Blackglass Pass under the promise of emergency winter grain. Malrek would send Wolfborn border families there after issuing a false evacuation order. Mercenaries would massacre both groups. Human bodies would be marked by wolf claws. Wolfborn bodies would be killed with human iron. Each side would wake to proof the other had broken the treaty. By sunrise, armies would move. In the confusion, Malrek would challenge Kael's leadership. Baron Vane would seize the disputed valley and its silver deposits. Two powerful men intended to build their futures from the graves of people who would never know why they died. Elara looked at the list of human villages. Briar Glen was first. How many? Eamon whispered. More than 200. Kael folded the ledger. We evacuate them tonight. No, Eamon said. Kael looked at him. Rusk has men on every road. If the village is empty, he'll know the plan is exposed. Elara thought of the grain summons. They expect us to go. Kael saw the idea forming and hated it before she finished. No? Elara looked at him. You said you would practice. This is not a choice between rooms. If we refuse the summons, they change the plan. We send soldiers. And when Rusk sees Wolfborn soldiers entering human villages, Kael's jaw tightened. The war begins early. Yes. Then I go to Blackglass. You cannot. I am the target. Exactly. Kael stared at her. Elara continued before he could turn fear into an order. They need you alive long enough to blame the right people. If you appear, Malrek will commit. Briar Glen trusts me. I can keep the villagers moving where we need them until your people are in position. I will not use you as bait. You are not using me. I am choosing. This can kill you. So could the river. That is not an argument. It is the entire argument. Her voice trembled now, but she did not retreat. I spent my life being told powerful people knew what risks peasants should accept. Baron Vane decided how much grain we could lose. Steward Pell decided whether our roofs belonged to us. Rusk decided fear would make Eamon obey. Do not stand here and tell me my choices disappear because your intentions are kinder. Kael looked wounded. Good. A cruel part of her thought. He needed to hear it. Then she softened. I know you want to protect me. Yes, I want to protect you too. His eyes closed. That is precisely the problem. Elara touched his hand. No, that is what makes it ours. Kael opened his eyes. For a long moment, king and peasant stood in the orange light of an old forge. Then he turned his hand and intertwined his fingers with hers. We do it together. The night of Long Moon began with snow. Ezra quietly diverted the Wolfborn families named in Malrek's false evacuation order, while Kael's moon guard took position along the pass. Elara rode in the first grain wagon from Briar Glen. Widow Marine sat beside her, muttering that any baron who promised free grain after years of collecting debts deserved suspicion on principle. Around them were families, children, old men, and farmers carrying empty sacks. None knew the same 20 Wolfborn Elara had rescued in the ravine moved silently through the forest beside the road. Kael traveled among them in white wolf form. Before leaving, he had pressed his forehead to Elara's. No heroics. She had stared at him. You are infiltrating an enemy mine as the Wolf King. Yes, and I am the reckless one? Obviously. The wagons reached Blackglass after midnight. Torches burned outside the abandoned mine. Rusk waited with mercenaries. So did Steward Pell. Elara's stomach tightened. The villagers were ordered from the wagons. Inside, Rusk said. Widow Marine frowned. Grain is usually stored somewhere less murderous. Rusk's hand moved toward his sword. Elara stepped forward. We were promised shelter. He recognized her. For the first time, surprise broke his composure. You. Elara smiled faintly. Disappointed? He seized her and dragged her into the mine. Inside, 20 moonbane cages lined the walls. Beyond them, human prisoners huddled behind wooden barriers. Missing villagers. Milla Reed among them, alive. At the far end stood Malrek, in ceremonial Wolfborn armor. So this is the peasant. he said. Elara looked around. People keep saying that as if I misplaced the information. Rusk forced her to her knees. Malrek approached. You saved a king who should have died. You preserved evidence that should have vanished. You convinced him to question his own counsel. That part was mostly you. His smile disappeared. You think courage makes you important. No? What then? Your fear of me does. He struck her. Outside, Kael heard the blow. Every instinct in him became violence. Elian's voice entered the pack bond. Wait. Inside, Elara tasted blood and looked at Rusk. Did he tell you? Rusk frowned. Tell me what? That when the war starts, you become the evidence he has to bury. Malrek's face hardened. She is baiting you. Elara smiled at Rusk. You're human. He's planning a Wolfborn coup. Which one of you survives after you can testify where the moonbane came from? Rusk slowly turned toward Malrek. One crack. Enough. Malrek drew a knife and stabbed him. Chaos erupted. Now, Kael ordered. 20 wolves entered Blackglass Mine. The first time Elara had seen them together. They were bleeding behind bars. Now they moved like a storm. Ilian struck the nearest mercenary. Nessa shifted mid-run, became human long enough to open the prisoner's barrier, then returned to wolf form. Kael went straight for Malrek. The traitor shifted into a massive copper wolf. They collided hard enough to shake dust from the ceiling. Elara ran toward Mila and the others. Take everyone to the entrance! A blast rolled beneath the mountain. Malrek had prepared the mine to collapse. After the massacre, stone fell. Kael drove the copper wolf backward, but Malrek retreated deliberately across a circle carved into the floor. Elara! Ilian shouted. Too late. Kael entered the circle. Moonbane chains erupted from hidden grooves and wrapped around his legs and throat. He crashed down. Malrek shifted human and drew a silver blade. You still lead with loyalty, he said. That is why you were always weak. Elara ran toward them. Rusk caught her ankle from where he lay bleeding. She fell. He pushed a key into her hand. End him. Not redemption, not forgiveness. One useful decision made too late. Elara ran to the mechanism. The key opened one lock. 3 remained. Another explosion shook the mine. Malrek raised the blade over Kael. Elara threw the key. It struck Malrek's face. A ridiculous attack. It worked. He turned. Kael lunged as far as the chains allowed and caught Malrek's arm in his jaws. The blade fell. Ilian reached Elara. Together they forced the locking wheel while prisoners fled around them. One chain opened. Then another. The ceiling cracked. Leave me! Kael snarled through the pack bond. Elara understood his eyes even if she could not hear the command. No! The final lock broke. Kael came free. Malrek ran toward the last blast lever. Rusk lifted a fallen crossbow with shaking hands and fired. The bolt struck Malrek's shoulder. Ezra's soldiers entered through the eastern tunnel. The traitor looked around and finally understood. He had lost. Kael shifted back into human form and approached him. Malrek laughed through the pain. You cannot kill me. If you do, I become the martyr who tried to expose human aggression. Kael stopped. Elara arrived beside him, holding Amon's copied ledger. He's right. Malrek smiled. Then Elara raised the papers. Which is why he gets a trial. The smile died. The public tribunal lasted 6 days. Amon testified. Mila and the other prisoners described the mine. Rusk survived long enough to confess his part and identify the men who carried Moonbane south. Steward Pell admitted Baron Vane knew about the planned massacre. Malrek's letters showed the truth. He wanted Kael's throne. Vane wanted the silver beneath the disputed valley. Hatred between humans and Wolfborn had merely been a tool. Baron Vane was arrested by his own crown. Malrek was stripped of rank and condemned to permanent exile beyond the northern wall. There was no triumphant execution, only consequence. And afterward, came the harder work. Kael reopened the accord of ash and moon. Elara insisted village representatives sit beside nobles. Grain guarantees, debt limits, shared patrols, independent border courts, and protection for travelers were added to the treaty. Kings have negotiated borders for 87 years, she told Kael, and there has been peace. There has been no war? He remembered the lesson. There is a difference. Months later, Elara returned to Briar Glen and found the Baron's seal removed from her cottage. The villagers had pooled money to clear the old debt and placed the deed in her name. You spent your whole life acting as if everyone else's home mattered, Widow Marine told her. Let us return the favor once. That evening, Elara found Kael near the orchard. You left, she said. You needed your village. I needed you too. He turned. For once there was no crisis between them. No council, no trap, no ambush, only choice. I have my home back, Elara said. Yes, and I still choose Moonhold. Kael's breath caught. She took his hand. I choose the border council. I choose my cottage. I choose arguing with you when you become impossible. That seems frequent. It is. He smiled, but his eyes were uncertain. And me? There it was. Not a king demanding allegiance. A man asking to be chosen. Elara remembered the white wolf behind iron bars. She remembered giving him her cloak before she knew his name, and the anger when she learned he had known hers. She remembered the patience with which he earned back what he had taken for granted. You, she whispered, touching his face, are the most complicated part. Kael nodded solemnly. I feared that, but yes. He kissed her beneath the melting snow. A year later, Kael asked Elara to marry him in the ravine where they had first met. No prophecy named her. No hidden bloodline made her worthy. The crown was not a reward for kindness. He chose her because she challenged him, and she chose him because he had learned how not to turn love into another form of authority. The 19 surviving members of the Moon Guard watched from the ridge while Kael held her hands. You saved me before you knew my name, he said. That is the part I will never forget. You did not save a king. You saved someone who was wounded because leaving him there would have been wrong. Elara looked at the wildflowers growing where the cages had once stood. Being afraid and leaving, she had learned, were not the same decision. Sometimes history began before anyone understood they were making it, with a storm, with an iron lock, with a peasant woman who had almost turned toward home and instead reached for her hatchet. She risked her life to save 20 wolves without knowing one of them. Wore a crown. Everything else came afterward. Compassion matters before rewards.